Hello everyone, Happy New Year! It is officially 2026 and you know what that means. It is time for my annual What I Read Last Year video where I'm going to tell you guys all of the books that I read in 2025. Now, a lot of these books I actually don't have with me because a lot of them, like the previous year, were ebooks that I read on Libby, and I actually didn't read a lot of physical books, and the ones that I did, I already owned. I didn't even really buy that many books this year. So this year I didn't actually read as many books as some of my previous years. I only read 32 books, and that really comes down to the fact that I started my master's program this year, and because of that I have been reading a lot of older novels or just really heavy theoretical novels and texts, and it made me not really want to read for pleasure. But let's dive right into it. The first books that I read this year was the Tierling trilogy, which is comprised of The Queen of the Tierling, The Invasion of the Tierling, and The Fate of the Tierling. These books are fantastic. They are pure adult fantasy. They are really gritty and realistic. They deal with things like coming to power, the difficult decisions that political people like this new queen have to make, a separation of church and state. It follows this young woman named Kelsey, who is the heir to the throne of the Tierling, who has been kept in hiding her whole life to protect her from potential assassins. When she takes the throne, she discovers that her mother was not the benevolent and wonderful queen that she thought she was, and that she actually made some terrible deals that Kelsey now has to deal with herself as she tries to be a good queen while also fighting the corrupting powers of magic and evil that infiltrate the country. It is such a good book. Second book, really heavy. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it definitely changes kind of how you view the entire world. Then the third book, ending is terrible. The rest of the series is very good and I highly recommend. The next book I read was The God of the Woods, which follows two separate children in the same family who go missing at their family's campsite. And we jump back and forth between the past and the present of the book as we kind of discover how their disappearances are connected. We discover what actually happened to both the boy and the girl. And it's honestly, it feels very much like an 80s summer movie. Next we have the first two books in the Witcher series, which is The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny. I have not watched the Witcher show, so these were completely new to me, but I am familiar with some of the things in the show. I've watched clips online. It was interesting to me to see how much of the show really is taken from these books, because there were a lot of things happening in these books where I was like, yeah, I remember seeing that clip or that conversation. The books are fairly episodic, but I really didn't feel myself kind of getting into them as much as I did with the Tierling books. It didn't really dive into some of those heavier topics that I found The Queen of the Tierling did, but it was still interesting. If you like The Witcher, you're probably gonna like those books as well. Okay, we're on to our first physical book, and that is Third Girl by Agatha Christie, and this is a Hercule Poirot mystery, and it basically follows the mystery of this girl coming into Poirot's office insisting that she is a murderer, and then the next day she goes missing. Poirot trying to figure out what happened to this girl, where did she go, why does she think she's a murderer, who does she think she killed. If you like Agatha Christie, if you like Poirot novels, it's good. She never misses, honestly. So next we've got the book Sleeping Giants. This is by a Canadian author. He is Quebecois, and I actually met him, which is so cool. He signed my book for me, and he was so nice, and I had such an interesting conversation with him, and he was so interesting to listen to at these like panels that I saw him talk at. It is basically formatted as a bunch of interviews. Basically the premise is that pieces of a giant like robotic human that seems like it's thousands and thousands of years old start appearing under the ground in different parts of the world. And it follows this basically secret government agency as they're trying to piece together this robot to create this giant human statue thing as they're trying to understand it. I really liked this book. I really liked some of these characters and I really enjoyed it. There are more books in the series. I'm probably gonna see if I can get my hands on them because I want to know what happens next. Next we have a bit of a fun one. It's not really a novel, but that is Psych's Guide to Crime Fighting for the Totally Unqualified. I am a massive Psych fan. I love it. I have a video about Psych on my channel. So this is a book that actually exists within the Psych universe. It is allegedly by the characters Sean Spencer and Burton Guster, and it's so fun because it's written like in Sean Spencer's voice, and then there are other characters that appear like his dad Henry Spencer, Juliet O'Hara. If you are a fan of Psych, you're gonna enjoy this book. It's basically just this like, here's how to be a detective according to Sean Spencer, and there are these little like quizzes at the end of each chapter, and it's so funny and so fun, and it really does feel like it is written by the characters. The next ones I read were for a video, and I promise they were only for a video. I did not read these for my pleasure, and that is the Divergent trilogy, Divergent, Insurgent, and Allegiant. What do I say about these? I read these for a reading for the first time video. They were not very good. They were so not good that I actually thought to myself, I've been reading a lot of adult fantasy, and these are the first like YA novel that I read this year. Am I getting too old for YA novels? The answer is no, by the way. I did read some other YA novels this year and I was like, these are fantastic. It's just these books. These books suck. I don't know what to say about them other than they're not very good. I feel like they're so iconic or infamous that everyone knows them. Like, I don't need to explain the plot to you because you know what they are. If you haven't read them, they're as bad as you think they are. I promise. And if you want to watch me suffer through them, you can watch my video. Next, I have a couple more books from Libby. So the first one is Thornhedge. And Thornhedge is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty told from the perspective of this fairy changeling named Toadling. It's a really interesting book as Toadling interacts with this knight who has come to try and rescue the princess who is trapped in this tower surrounded by thorns, and she can't let him do that because they need to keep that princess asleep and contained because she's dangerous. It's a really interesting retelling of Sleeping Beauty and the idea of why you would want to put someone to sleep if you were probably a good person. Okay, the next book I read is Her Radiant Curse. So this is a book that actually takes place in the universe of Six Crimson Cranes, which I actually haven't read, so I didn't really have any established idea of this universe, but you don't really need to for this book. This book kind of is a standalone. It follows this young girl who basically gets cursed to have a hideous face of a snake, and she has to try and protect her sister because this evil tiger spirit has said that her sister is going to die. There's a lot of really interesting world building and magic use in this. Really interesting world, and it made me want to read the other books by this author because I want to explore this world even further. So next we got into another YA novel, and this was a YA novel where I was like, oh, okay, I'm not too old for YA anymore, and that is Legendborn. This book is incredible. This book is so incredible. I wrote a research paper about it. It follows this teenage girl named Bree Matthews who goes to this historically white university that her mother went to as well. She discovers that there are this society of Legendborn, which are descendants of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and that they had something to do with her mother's death. She decides she wants to investigate them, she wants to infiltrate them, and she wants to take them down from the inside. This book is fantastic. I loved every second of it. It does kind of show the casual racism of long-standing institutions, the profiling that she experiences, the misogynoir that she experiences. It is such a beautiful novel. I highly recommend it to anyone. The next one is Artemis, which is by Andy Weir, who is the writer of The Martian. So this one takes place on a colony on the moon, and it follows this girl who is a courier who gets involved in committing some corporate espionage and sabotage, which ends up going horribly wrong and ends up having assassins coming after her. Definitely very different from a lot of his other work. With Artemis, you are seeing through the eyes of a character who has lived on the moon her whole life. So there is science involved, like they do explain the science behind stuff, but it feels very different, and it feels a lot more like an action movie than the other texts do. It wasn't my favorite of his works. It's just very, very different. But if you like sci-fi stuff, if you like heists, and maybe you'll enjoy it anyways. I think I just kind of went into it with an expectation of what it would be, and it didn't meet that. Talking about sci-fi, now we get into some of my favorite sci-fi novels of all time, and that is Illuminae, which I read before, but I reread it this year, and I reread it so that I would be prepared to read the sequel, Gemina. They're actually formatted like a collection of evidence about some different events, like chat logs. There are some that are just like pictures. Illuminae follows basically these two teenagers who are escaping from their mining planet after it gets blown up by a different mining company. So they are now on the run in these big cruisers with everyone else from their planet, but there's also some sort of virus that's sort of like that 28 Days Later Rage Zombies virus going on. And then there's also an AI that thinks that the best way to protect people is to just kill a bunch of people because of that rage virus. Gemina takes place on the jump station Heimdall, which the ships from this book are trying to get to, but we see a bunch of different things going on at the same time. There is basically these parasitic worms that are escaping onto the jump station. There's this kill squad, which were dispatched by the people who bombed the planet in the first book to try and take the people out on this platform so that they can take out the people who are on these ships so that they can't tell people about what happened. And again, we're following these two teenagers as they're trying to survive. There's a little bit of a romance going on between them. It is fantastic. I highly recommend those books. I think they're just fantastic. The next book is a little bit of a heavier read, and that is The Knowing. So this is a nonfiction book. It is about residential schools. It is basically told through the lens of the writer trying to put together a history of her own family and her grandmother and her own family's experience in residential schools. This was really heavy, but I also learned a lot. I did not realize there's so much about the residential school system that I did not know. I think that if you are someone who wants to learn more about residential schools, I think that it's an important read, and I think you will learn a lot about it, but I think it's also something that you need to take your time with and really digest it. The fact that you're not just reading statistics, you're not just reading facts, you're reading the stories of her own family as she tries to figure out what happened to her grandmother. The next one I read was All Systems Red, which is the first book in the Murderbot series. It is a series about this robot / biological construct, but his governor chip, which is meant to control him, to make him do what people tell him to do, is been hacked, and he just wants to watch TV all day. It is honestly so funny. I love the character so much, but also it does have a lot of action in it, and it's also not super long. None of the books in this series are. Okay, the next one is Fahrenheit 451. I hadn't read it before, so I was like, this feels really pertinent to what's going on in the world today. I feel like I should read it, and it was not really what I expected. All I knew about it is that it was like the book burning book, but the main character is a fireman, which instead of stopping fires, they now set fires, and we follow him as he starts to question why they're doing this, why people are willing to die with their books. There's a lot more to it that I don't want to spoil for you. I think you would really benefit from reading it. I think everyone would, because it has a lot of different commentary on the way we consume media and how fast the world goes. Okay, so the next one was an audiobook, and that is Folktales of Japan, 28 Japanese folktales with cultural commentary. This was an audiobook that I listened to on Spotify, and it was actually read out by the author of the book. It's really, really interesting because it tells these different folktales of Japan, but it also pairs all these folktales with commentary on cultural practices, historic events, and different information about what the importance of these contexts are. I learned a lot about Japanese culture, and I learned a lot about samurai lords, which I wasn't expecting. The next book that I listened to was another audiobook, and that is Carmilla. Carmilla, I think everyone knows as the sort of precursor to Dracula, female vampire story. I really liked Carmilla. I think I liked it more than Dracula, actually, because with Dracula, it is sort of this, let's go across the world, go to Transylvania, chase this guy down. Whereas with Carmilla, the threat is in the home. It is this girl that they let into their home. They become friends with her. They let her stay with them. That is the threat. And I think it just makes it feel a lot more personal and a little bit more scary. The next one is a graphic novel, and that is the graphic novel Ducks. And this is a book which is all about the author Kate Beaton's experience working in the oil sands. It dives into sort of the ecological problems with this oil refinement process and why people would choose to work there anyways. It also dives into a lot of the sexual harassment and assault that women in these fields experience, and specifically with the author's own experience with those things. It was a really beautiful way of processing that. So the next book is another reread, and that is Dazzling. This is a book based on Igbo mythology, so it's set in Nigeria in the 90s, and it follows these two girls as they deal with sort of spirits of Igbo mythology. It gets really dark, it gets really violent at certain points, and especially when you consider that these girls are like 12. I feel like a lot of times when we look at mythology-inspired text, it's usually Greek and Roman mythology that we look at. Legendborn has some Arthurian mythology, which is super fun, so I'm always into looking at other mythologies. Next is another reread, and that is Emma by Jane Austen. I love Emma. It is one of my favorite Jane Austen novels. It basically follows this rich girl named Emma Woodhouse who loves to play matchmaker for the people around her as she basically tries to raise her new friend Harriet up to a higher social level, make matches with different people, and eventually realize what it is that she wants. It's really fun, it's really funny, and I just really enjoy it. The next book I read was Two Trees Make a Forest, and this is a memoir by an author who talks about her experience being from Taiwan, living in Canada, and her experience sort of moving around. Basically, it kind of jumps between stories of her childhood, about her mother, her grandparents, her own experience visiting Taiwan, and it kind of dives into this idea of like having a place to call home and to call your own. And it does so with a huge connection to the environment and the mountains and the sea and the trees, and it's really beautiful, this connection between nature and sort of a relationship to a place. So next one is a book that I've been trying to read for a while and I finally got around to it, and that is The Gilded Wolves. If you like the Six of Crows duology, you're gonna like this book. This book follows a group of, I think they're teenagers in 1880s Paris as they commit a heist at the Grand World Exhibition in Paris. I could get into it more. There's a lot of magic called forging, which allows people who have the ability to create these magical objects. There is a huge heist that, of course, goes partially wrong. I love every single one of these characters. There is definitely a character who's very similar to Kaz and Inej, but other than that, I'd say the rest of the characters don't really have a pure one-to-one comparison with Six of Crows. I love especially the characters Layla and Zofia. I love them so much, and I think you will too if you read them. And it doesn't feel like a Six of Crows copy. That's the other thing. Like, I was introduced to it as being similar to Six of Crows, but it does definitely feel like its own unique thing. So the next one is another book that has been a while since I've got and finally got around to reading it. And it's another graphic novel, and that is Demon in the Wood. This is a graphic novel novelization of the short story by the same name set in the Shadow and Bone universe. And it is basically the story of the Darkling and how he kind of became the hardened person he is. You're gonna love this book. It's the same wonderful story, but with this really nice artwork that goes along with it, and it's really just shows sort of the brutality of his experience and why he became the way that he is. So our next text is another audiobook, and it is another anthology of myths, and that is Woodland Folktales of Britain and Ireland. There's something about British and Irish folktales that just feel so homey, and there's a lot of like playfulness in them, and I'm definitely gonna read some of her other anthologies as well because I just really enjoyed these. I think they're very different from some of the other mythologies that I've read. Okay, the next book I read was Artificial Condition, which is the second book in the Murderbot series. In this one, the Murderbot has left his team from the first book and becomes friends with the control system of a transport cargo ship. It's fun. It's really funny to me sometimes because this character like hates being the protagonist. I love that. I think it's so funny. It adds a lot of action. It's a good sequel, and I'm excited to read the next ones, which I'll be doing in the new year. And my final book of the year was Partners in Crime by Agatha Christie. This is a Tommy and Tuppence mystery. So if you are familiar with Agatha Christie, you probably know Poirot. You might even know Miss Marple. But I had personally never heard of Tommy and Tuppence. Tommy and Tuppence are a young married couple in their early 20s who in this book basically inherit a detective agency. One of the things that I love about this book is that these characters are just so fun to read. Tommy and Tuppence are hilarious. They both love fictional detective fiction, and so they're always imagining themselves as these different fictional detectives like Sherlock Holmes and Watson, and they just want to emulate them so badly. They're like, oh, is this a Sherlock Holmes case? We should pretend to be Sherlock Holmes for this one. And I've never related to a character more than I have Tuppence Beresford. She's so eager to like just have an adventure, and I love that. The two of them also have really funny banter with each other. They're constantly teasing each other and poking fun at each other. It's very fun, very funny, and honestly really endearing. I highly recommend some Tommy and Tuppence for you. That is every book that I read in 2025. It wasn't a lot, and it wasn't a lot that I had physical copies of, but this year I'm going to try and read some more of my physical books, which I think is definitely possible, and you'll see why at the end of this month, because I might have a little plan for something. But I'm also hoping that I will be able to read a bit more independent work this year. I'm going to try probably to get my hands on some more independent novels because I want to give indie authors more of a chance. The reason for that, I released my own novel last Christmas, The Mistletoe Gala. It is a Hallmark movie-inspired Christmas romance. Always plugging my work, what can I say? And I really want to kind of give some more love to some indie authors myself this year. That is it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. What was your favorite book that you read this year? For me, probably Legendborn. It was fantastic. It was such a good book, and I'm really excited for the sequel of it. Let me know in the comments what your favorite book was this year. If you want to stick around for my channel and more videos coming out, please do feel free to subscribe and stick around. I'm really excited for some of the things I have planned for this year. I've got some more reading for the first time videos planned and some more basically the plot of videos planned, as well as some new series. So I'm very excited about that. That's it for me today. I will see you all in the next video. Happy New Year!